Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast created to look deep into what it means to be a runner and endurance athlete. Our episodes are filled with real stories from real runners, elite to the everyday athlete. We bring together healthcare providers, athletes, and dive deep into topics that matter most to runners. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards, physical therapist, author, athlete, and complete coffee addict.
And I'm Dr. Kacy Sinders, physical therapist, athlete, and pun expert extraordinaire. We're so passionate about changing running culture to improve the health, wellness, and fulfillment of our endurance athlete community. And we hope that these conversations inspire you to focus on putting your health first so that performance and PRs can follow. Now let's get to the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to More Than Miles. Today is a day where Kacy and I are just chatting it up. We're having a coffee talk, if you will, about one of our favorite topics and something that we do a lot in clinic, which is blood flow restriction training. And then we'll probably touch a little bit on how that's used with orthobiologics. And if you don't know what that word means, that's something like PRP, which most runners probably know about, but it's basically injectables that help with tendon or ligament issues in your body. Hi, Kace.
Hi, Kate. Here we are, just nerding out.
That's good. It's a good day when you can have time to sit around and nerd out.
We don't ever get tired about talking about these things. So it's really fun. This is why we have a podcast, because it just so happens that other people are nerds too and want to hear our coffee chats.
That's right. I think someday we should probably just record our lunchtime hour, and that would be really a funny podcast.
Yeah, our patients would love that, I think. That could be like a patient only episode. We'll just send it out on the newsletter and people could have a little window into the life at Precision.
That's right. All the snacks and the coffee at lunchtime.
Snacks, the coffee. Y'all, we've needed cookies so many times in the past month.
That's not a good sign, Kacy. When we have Kay go out on an emergency cookie/coffee run.
Yes, but it just means, we're working hard for you guys,
It's true. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I said, what could everybody use? And Elizabeth said, cookies. Definitely cookies.
Also, hi, Elizabeth. If you're running, you're doing great.
That's right.
She always tells me she listens while she's running. So.
Oh, does she? Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. Well, and we also the other day did a meditation during staff meeting. I made everybody lay down and I did a guided meditation for 20 minutes.
Yes, we breathed in the colors.
That's right.
And what did we exhale?
Stuff that didn't serve us.
Things
we didn't need.
That's right. Things we didn't need.
Yep. It was really great. Everyone seemed a little bit more relaxed, at least afterwards.
Yeah. It is helpful to take a pause during the day because it can be pretty crazy with patient care and just having to be on all the time. So it was very nice. So thank you, Kate, for being our meditation guru. Kate has this yoga teacher meditation voice that she can just whip out whenever she wants. And it's the opposite of her normal voice. So it's like a real talent.
Well, thank you. I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, it still wasn't different enough for me to be able to do your guided meditations to help myself with a meditation practice, because I was like, oh, it's my boss talking to me. I can't.
Yeah, that's different. It makes it hard. Yes, I know. I understand. But at least
everyone else in the world. Perfect. Yes. Grade A meditation voice.
Thank you. All right. Well, with that, let's jump into blood flow restriction training.
Yes. So first, it would be helpful to define what blood flow restriction training is. And so what this is it's pretty self-explanatory by the name, but we use a cuff, which is very similar to a blood pressure cuff, for example. And we will, depending on what part of the body we're exercising, we will either put it around the proximal thigh or the proximal arm, with the goal of occluding the major artery in that area to a certain percentage. All of these companies who make these devices out there are very finely tuned and can sense how much they are occluding the artery with the pressure. So very similar to a blood pressure cuff. And we will perform exercises with a certain percentage of occlusion of the artery. I can hear a lot of people wondering, and anytime I'm trying to explain this to a patient, they're like, why in the heck would we want to do that? I thought that increasing blood flow was good for me in recovering from my injury. And you're not wrong. So what we get when we do blood flow restriction training is we create this environment while we're exercising that's very similar to high intensity exercise. So as if we're doing a maximum effort, but we don't actually have to load our body that much or at all. I am usually doing very like single joint, simple muscle or some single joint, single muscle exercises with people. And they cannot believe how difficult it is when there is less blood flow. And so what this does is this creates a response to the body. And we have this, I think in the science world, we call it chemotaxis, but all of these molecules will migrate to that area and it creates this physiological response as if we are doing some intense training. And as we all know, as athletes, when we do intense training, the recovery is when we actually get stronger and when we get the more like resiliency of our tissues. And, when we're training, we're also talking about the cardiovascular system, all of that good stuff. So we really heighten this effect, this recovery effect, by stimulating high intensity exercise. And the benefit for rehab populations are people who've had injuries like muscle strains, tendinopathies or tendinitis, surgeries, things like that, is we don't actually have to put a mechanical load on it, and we can strengthen the muscle without actually loading and compromising any of the healing of those tissues.
That was a really, really good definition. Good job. So the way that we use it in our clinic is we use it, like Kacy said, for tendinopathies, muscle strains, post-surgical patients, people who've had injectables like PRP, things like that. And we use it in order to get the most out of that muscle. And we find that it really improves recovery from injury time by quite a bit. And so typically our sessions will do a couple a week. So in our clinic, we do hour-long appointments. But if we have someone that does BFR, so blood flow restriction BFR, we oftentimes will do a second appointment that's just 30 minutes and only working on the BFR later in the week so that we can get as much benefit as possible. So what we find is that particularly after something like PRP, we will that same day or the day after somebody gets PRP, we will go ahead and start blood flow restriction training and do it 2 times a week for, at least a month. That's the most important kind of time frame, but then most likely 6, sometimes 8 weeks following.
Yeah. And we can get into exactly what that looks like in a moment. In terms of post-PRP, we've been working a lot with the doctors in our area to kind of get this word out about this research about how much we can improve the efficacy of these orthobiologics with blood flow restriction training. And the reason that that's the case is that we're basically like heightening the effect of the platelet-rich plasma. So you all aren't familiar, I'll explain quickly. So PRP or platelet-rich plasma is basically if you go into your doctor, they're going to draw out a certain amount of blood from somewhere in your body, usually from a vein, and spin it in a centrifuge to where we have all of our white blood cells and kind of concentrated at the top. And then the red blood cells that carry the oxygen in are going to be at the bottom. And so the effect of this is that we're basically separating the blood out to where all of our like healing, good juju, good molecules are at the top, and the less useful components of blood are at the bottom. And we're going to inject all of that kind of, we'll call it super fluid, into wherever your injury is, right? Whether that be a tendon or a muscle or knee joint, like meniscus, something like that. I always laugh when I talk about PRP, or not laugh, but I've been researching PRP since I tore my hamstring in high school as a sophomore. I was grasping at straws. I was looking for whatever I could possibly do. I had a proximal hamstring tear slightly off of my ischial tuberosity. And so I've known about PRP for a long time. And it's funny that I thought that I understood it in high school. But anyway, so combining PRP and BFR is just like, it's a no-brainer in terms of improving the effects. Because if you're going to put this huge investment, because, PRP is in general not covered by insurance and it's expensive. So if we can maximize basically your body's ability to absorb that treatment, it's been a really cool sort of new avenue for me as a PT. And I've seen it work really, really well, which is exciting.
Yeah, we've had a ton of our clients recently that we're using it with. In fact, we have so many people that we're doing BFR with that we had to get another BFR cuff because some PT fights were breaking out. Not really.
No, my patient needs the BFR.
I know there weren't really fights, but it was definitely one of those things that we needed to get another one so that everybody could use it.
Yeah. I'm sure people are wondering, what does a BFR session actually look like, or what does this look like logistically, right? So when we're setting someone up, we typically have them lie down. The cuff is going to go either on the arm or the leg. For us working in the runner business, it's usually around the leg. The machine will calibrate and find what the occlusion pressure, the complete occlusion pressure is for, in this case, the femoral artery. And so it finds what total occlusion is and then backs it off to where we want to exercise, which I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, is around 80%, I believe. So obviously this is not a tourniquet. We're not completely cutting off blood flow. We're just occluding it to a certain percentage and being very precise with it. So the machine finds that range or that pressure that it will want to keep while we exercise. And this is based off of science and research protocols. We will perform a single exercise. So whether this be a squat or a knee extension or a knee flexion or hip abduction. So we can kind of, depending on what tissues we're trying to target and what's going to be appropriate for that patient, we choose an exercise and we go through a specific protocol. And the protocol is 30 repetitions, 30 seconds rest, and then 3 sets of 15 with 30 seconds rest between each set of 15. And so what the idea is those 30 repetitions really build up. I'm just going to use this term because runners understand it, like the lactic acid, or really get the muscle kind of pumped through full of that kind of good muscle burn type of feeling. And that's all of those molecules circulating in the area. And then we do 3 sets of 15 in what is a somewhat anaerobic environment, because at that point, the artery's been included enough to where there is less oxygen objectively in that limb. So the three sets of 15 are like our money maker there. And so depending on the patient, if they have no restrictions and they tolerate okay, like most patients tolerate it well. I haven't had anyone not, but of course we're always monitoring our patients. We'll do 2 to 3 exercises and no more than that. It's really beneficial. I think that's kind of the sweet spot. And certain ones are more difficult than others. Believe it or not, I think squats are a lot easier than like a knee extension, for example, because we use a lot more muscle altogether with like a double leg exercise versus a single leg exercise.
Yeah. And the surprising thing is, we talk about as physical therapists, how we want to do functional exercises all the time. And it's really funny because doing BFR, you use some of those basic exercises that anybody can usually do. And sometimes they're even the same exercises you would do in a hospital setting that are not necessarily the kind of things that we would do with elite athletes typically. But because of the way that we use the muscles in those particular exercises, they're really helpful when we're doing BFR. So it just looks a little bit different than what a typical PT session would be. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that BFR is something that people have been doing in gyms for a really long time. Well, I was getting there. So what was happening previously is, and I think it's still happening in several places, is people would use bands to try to occlude an artery, and they wouldn't be able to measure how much occlusion, and it is not really the safest practice. And so when we do it, and again, we're PTs, so we really err on the side of caution, but we definitely have the machines that calibrate and look at the occlusion and make sure that there is enough blood flow. So the risk is incredibly low. You never say zero risk, but it's very, very, very low compared to if you were to wrap a band around your arm, have no measurement whatsoever, and then do exercise until your hand turns blue.
Yeah, Do not chase the pump.
Do not. So
Yeah, the
anybody who
biceps.
got that idea out of this conversation, remember, don't do that.
Yeah, I know your biceps look so good with that band, but
What do you mean? I was doing that right now.
oh yeah. Yes. And so the other really key thing about these devices and machines that we use is that they are constantly monitoring the blood flow restriction as well. So obviously we're going to have changes in pressure when we are moving a joint or when a muscle contracts. And so you can kind of hear it. It's like a ticking sound when we're using the blood flow restriction machine. And it's constantly adjusting to try to keep it at that 80% or at that set percentage. And of course, this depends on the protocol. I think ours is typically at 80% because we found that that works well. So it's constantly adjusting to account for the muscle pump. And of course, some different models, I'll say less nuanced models, don't necessarily adjust like that. But the research and from a comfort perspective for the patient, the ones that adjust, I find to be ideal.
Yeah. So I think this is definitely something that if you've never had BFR, if you've got a tendon issue or muscle strain or post-surgical, it's something that you should find a place that does this and does it with, one of these machines that can really calibrate and monitor the occlusion level, because it makes a significant difference in terms of return from injury.
Yeah, and the really cool thing too is, of course, we work with doctors on this all the time, and certain MDs will have different protocols and different ideas or processes they like to follow. And so the nice thing with BFR, I remember reading this research article a while ago. This is a little bit earlier. We can do direct exercises that actually exercise the muscle that we're treating, or we can do really any exercise and we and still have the benefits. So if we're not even really using the muscle that has, potentially been treated with the PRP, or even like the area of the body that is injured. So say if we have the Achilles is a little bit too hot to do 75 repetitions on, we can use other muscle groups because they have this systemic effect. So once we have this sort of, if we look at it as a training session, we see the same response occur and throughout the body. And the way that this one study measured that was doing lower body BFR and then measuring rotator cuff, the rotator cuff and the inflammatory markers of the rotator cuff. Someone who had like a tendinitis type thing. So cool, right?
It is really cool. And I was going to say, so you can do it if you have an upper extremity issue, you can still do it on the lower extremity with the leg, or you can do it on the opposite side of the body because it is systemic. So it's a great way to get to things that you maybe couldn't have gotten to previously without this technology. It's a great way to address things that perhaps we just never would have been able to do for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah. And I think what I love about BFR is it's kind of almost like hacking your own physiology, right? It's like using what we know about the body to encourage healing, which is basically, if I think about it, kind of the motto of all of physical therapy is like, how do we optimize our own physiology to optimize healing? And so that's like my favorite thing about BFR is because it is high tech, but again, we're not injecting anything. We're not actually manipulating the tissue in any way other than exercise and that patient's own movement, which I think is so cool.
You're such a nerd.
I am. I'm like, I love this stuff so much.
No, it's great.
Yeah. I was talking to someone who is not necessarily in the rehab or into the healthcare professions about physical therapy and how it's kind of evolved over the years. And right now, I think what's happening is this shift finally towards more active treatment and, doing more and less passive treatment, right? So if we think about the PT of old of like rest, ice compression, elevation, ultrasound, e-stim, which we have never done in our clinic because we've known about this. But I think finally, by and large, we're shifting towards more active treatment, which I think is just bang for your buck. Like you get stronger and your injury heals versus the alternative, which could be that neither of those things happen.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, I think that's really BFR in a nutshell, cases. I don't think there's much more than that. And this will probably be a short episode. But again, I think it's a great informational episode. So if you're not sure what to do next, or you're kind of stuck with an injury, or you're not really stuck, but you want to get back faster, this is definitely one way to do it.
Yeah, hopefully a quick digestible episode. And it's nice because now we can send this to our patients. Be like, oh, you have questions? Here you go.
Oh, exactly. I didn't think about that, but it's true. Sometimes it's fun when our patients will say, oh, I heard this episode about blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, oh, I hope I said things correctly. No,
I said, I was like, I heard you say on the podcast. I was like, what did I say on the podcast?
I know. We promise it's good information. We're just teasing.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. This was fun, Kacy, being able to just have a conversation with you today, and we will talk with you soon.
Been fun. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you so much for listening today. We are so happy that you're here. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with a friend. Even better, share it on social media, because sharing is caring. And the more people we can reach, the better.
Another way you can help us out is by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. So give us those 5 stars and tell us how awesome we are. Really, we love to hear how awesome we are. To support our work financially, you can also join our Patreon squad at patreon.com/morethanmiles, where for a few dollars a month, you can help us keep the show going and growing. This season is sponsored by Fast Bananas. Why buy multiple subscriptions made for everyone when you can have one specifically crafted for runners? Fast Bananas has online yoga classes, strength training programs, meditations, recipes, communities to ask questions, and so much more. Check out Fast Bananas at fastbananas.com or follow them on Instagram at fastbananasrun. Don't forget that training is so much more than miles.